Hello, everyone, and welcome to the HR Buddy podcast and the webcast. Whether you're joining us live or listening or watching back, thank you, and good to have you all with us. I'm Damien McCarthy, Managing Director of HR Buddy. HR Buddy delivers HR and employment law advice and support both remotely and on-site to businesses across Ireland, along with our outsourced payroll services and employer of record services, and also our HRIS management system, HR Buddy Manager. Now, I'm joined today by the HR Buddy team, HR business consultants Breach Fallon, Patrick Scanlon, and Colin Ryan. Hi, folks.
Hi,
Damien.
Hey, David.
For anyone on live with us for the show today, please feel free to drop a question in the Q&A section, and we get to the Q&A live session at the end of this podcast or webcast. So if you're live with us, if you have a question, you have a query, pop it in the Q&A section. We're also going to have a live poll running on the show this morning, and I'll give you details of that in a second. But first of all, the agenda for the show is we're going to take a look at seasonal HR guidance. It's June, a lot of younger workers coming into workplaces, a lot of seasonal employment throughout different industries. One of the surprising things or shocking things that keeps on coming up for us as HR consultants is being asked about trial periods or hearing about trial periods running. So I'm going to be asking Patrick Scanlon about that in a minute. We're going to focus in on younger workers because there's a whole host of different rules and regulations with regards to staying compliant with younger workers, and we'll run through that in a bit of detail as well with Breach and Colin. We're going to look at the practical approach to seasonal hiring, giving you the advice to getting that right and getting it ready on time. We also and always do a WRC case. And I suppose the key thing here, any WRC case that we cover on the show, we're looking to analyse it, break it down, and get the key learnings from it so that everyone watching or listening can get those key learnings. We've run a poll throughout the month of May across our socials on LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. And we asked, what are your big HR issues? We'll get to that poll result in a while, but it threw up absence management to let you in ahead of time. So we're going to focus in on absence management as well on the show today. We always do our latest HR update section, and we've got some updates in the areas of Social Security and the PRSI clause inside employment contracts, which is very interesting. We're taking a look at the Employment Permits Amendment Regulations 2026. Patrick's going to give us a good bit of detail on that, which is very, very important. There are a number of changes there. Goes without saying, we need to touch in on the EU Pay Transparency Directive, which was meant to be disposed into law by the 7th of June. Obviously, that deadline is missed. So what is happening there? What do employers need to be ready for? What do you need to do now? I suppose maybe there's a bit of confusion when it hasn't been implemented by the deadline of June 7th and so on. So we'll clear a few things up on the EU Pay Transparency Directive as well. And it's June, so if you've got 50 plus employees, gender pay gap reporting, it's a big month for you. You need to take your snapshot. We're going to run through that and give you some good guidance on how you can get your gender pay gap reporting easily, less expensively, and so on. And as always, our Q&A section at the end of the show. So again, if you have any questions or queries and you're on live with us on the show this morning, feel free to pop them in. Okay, now we're going to do a poll, a live poll, and I invite everyone who's on live with us today to join in. It's anonymous, so don't worry, but we're asking the question, does your workplace have an extreme weather policy? The reason why we wanted to run this poll is it's an area that's constantly coming up, and it came up in the month of May because we had, for once, we had good weather, hot weather, 29, 30 degrees, and there's always loads of queries and questions about, working in hot temperatures. We'd like to get those questions more, but we need the good weather. Usually they come up when there's extreme weather, like orange and red weather warnings with snow, ice, storms, and so on. And our advice is that every workplace should have an extreme weather policy that looks after all three parties. Now, what are the three parties? Three parties are obviously the business, the employer. The second party is the employee, who, from a health and safety point of view, you need to look after and be compliant and look after uh, their safety, health, and welfare under that act. And the third party is your customer. They need to be looked after as well, and you can't have the business impacted. So an extreme weather policy would look different for every workplace, and you would tailor it to suit your workplace and do it within the bounds of employment legislation. And we are saying every workplace needs an extreme weather policy, and an awful lot of workplaces don't, unfortunately. It is something that we can help you with, but for the moment, for the poll this morning, we want to get the percentages, honestly. So I invite you to use the poll if you're on live with us this morning, and let us know, does your workplace have an extreme weather policy? Okay, so we're going to move along, and we're going to concentrate first on the show today on seasonal HR guidance. As I mentioned at the top, trial periods, they always come up, Patrick Scanlon. We always get asked about them, and it always shocks me how many employers still run trial periods and think that that's okay. So let's clear it up. Are trial periods illegal?
You're correct, Damien. Trial periods are illegal. Unfortunately, it's something that we do see come up quite often still, particularly within the hospitality and tourism sector, but they are illegal. Where you are taking on somebody for work, you are taking them on as an employee. So where you're taking on an individual for work, they need to be paid, they need to get a contract of employment, they need to get a pay slip.
Yeah, and I suppose the big thing here is, look, maybe there's a bigger chance with younger workers, not to kind of go in directly into one industry or anything like that. I suppose anywhere where there's a skill involved, maybe in hospitality, a chef or so on, both the employee and the employer are trying it, and it mightn't work out. But I suppose the point here is, once they're working for you, they are an employee on day one, and they have employment rights. So, I mean, what does the employer need to look after in the first month? And obviously in the first 5 days is kind of a key area.
So within the first 5 days, the employer needs to give the employee the core terms of employment in writing, and they would cover items such as what's the working week, what's the start date of employment. Within the first month the employer must give the main terms of employment, which is covered within the contract of employment. Now, both the core terms and supplementary terms can be covered, all covered within the contract of employment. And you mentioned the 5 day rule regards to core terms. Well, the contract of employment can be given to the employee even before they commence employment. So you don't have to hang around waiting for the employee to join the organization before they issue the contract. Our advice is always to get that done and dusted before the employee starts, and it just makes the rest of the employee-employer relationship plain sailing.
Yeah, another area, Patrick, is, pay slips. Like, I can think of examples. It's not necessarily in our work as HR consultants, but even friends who have, maybe teenagers who've started a job. They're 2 or 3 weeks in, or 2 or 3 weekends in, and they don't know what their rate of pay is. They haven't received the contract, they haven't received the pay slip, and so on. I mean, like, that is wrong. That is illegal. So with regards to the pay slip side of things, we have the 5 day rule with regards to core terms, which would deal with pay and hours and all that type of thing, the core elements of the employment. But with regards to pay slips, what do employers need to make sure to get right there?
So each time you do pay the employee, you need to match that with a pay slip, and that pay slip needs to show the total amount of earnings and the nature of amount of any deductions. And failure to provide any of those documents, like the contract, the pay slip, not just leaves you open to a claim from that individual employee, but you also might leave yourself open to a WRC inspection where that disgruntled individual, where they're not getting their pay slip, they're obviously going to be frustrated. They're only one phone call or email away from the WRC. So you're just leaving as an employer, you're just leaving yourself open to a whole host of problems just simply by not issuing a pay slip.
Yeah, and we definitely have seen that in HR Buddy, new clients coming to us. And I suppose the point I would make is, if you're getting it wrong with your seasoned workers or your younger workers now, and the WRC become involved, they know you haven't been getting it right in the past, so they go back, and it's a bit of a mess, and it can be very stressful. But I suppose the good news is it's easy to get these things right, but maybe you need professional help in doing so. I think one of the key points around the trial periods is it's a probationary period, and the employment relationship is entitled to a probationary period. And if you run a probationary period, and you get your compliance right with your contracts and your pay slips and everything else that you should be doing, um, both the employer and the employee has an opportunity to see if the job is the right fit inside in that probationary period. But trial periods are illegal. I suppose that's the key point we're making. Okay, we're going to move on, just take maybe zone in on younger workers. I suppose I mentioned that at the top there that, there's a whole host of uh, different rules when it comes to younger workers with regards maybe their ages and so on. So hours and timing, Patrick, what do employers need to be aware of for younger workers?
So we often come across it with clients where they think that the working time restrictions, break times within the Organizational Working Time Act apply to everybody across the board. But that's incorrect. Under the Protection of Young Persons Employment Act, there are different rules for those under the age of 18 in terms of maximum working days, rest periods, and so forth. Um, for example, you're not allowed to hire 14-year-olds during the school term, while 15-year-olds can be hired for a maximum of 8 hours per week. During the summertime, then 14 and 15-year-olds, their maximum working week is 35 hours or 40 hours in the case of work experience. Also, those aged 16 and 17, their maximum working week throughout the year is 40 hours per week. And that's very different from the Organisation of Working Time Act, where for adult workers, the maximum average working week is 48 hours. So that's something that employers really need to be aware of, particularly if they're taking on somebody under the age of 18.
Yeah, and it's very easy to fall down there. And we would really appreciate that as well, that, there's an employer or there's a business that's busy. They bring in young seasonal staff. There's a line manager, a supervisor rostering. It's very easy to get this wrong. And I suppose I would make the point, maybe that's where software comes in,
Mhm.
like the HR Buddy
Definitely.
Manager software that we have that can control these things and kind of prompt you if you're getting it wrong with your younger workers and so on. The information is there in front of you, and the line manager doing the rostering and the scheduling. They can have it flagged ahead of time when they're doing the rosters and so on. So software like HR Buddy Manager works very well in that regard. Night work limits. Breach, how's it going? Will you go through night work limits for younger workers for everybody?
Yes. Night work, it's another area where employers need to be really mindful of when they're employing younger workers because the rules are much stricter than for adults. So, for example, like if someone is under 16, they can't start work before 8 a.m. and they can't work later than 8 p.m. For 16 and 17-year-olds, there's a little bit more flexibility, but there are still limits. So you have to remember that. They generally can't start before 6 a.m. and they must finish by 10 p.m. Before a school day, or 11 p.m. if they don't have school the next day.
Okay, and with regards to breaks and rest, then.
Breaks and rest. Yeah, breaks and rest periods are another really important protection for younger workers. Again, the rules are stricter than those for adults. For under 16s, once they work more than 4 hours, they're entitled to 30-minute break. And they also must they must get like 14 consecutive hours rest in every 24-hour period, as well as 2 days off each week. But say for 16 and 17-year-olds, the entitlement is slightly different. They're entitled to a 30-minute break after 4.5 hours, along with 12 hours rest in every 24 hours and 2 days off in a 7-day period. So I'd say like what's really great is I would often say to clients, I'll give them the poster. You can get posters with the breaks and the rest
Yeah,
periods and the night work. And that's really good for them to have kind of displayed there in the canteen or in an area for them to remind themselves of that.
yeah, and I think it's as important for the line manager or their people manager doing the rostering and so on to have
Yeah.
that little poster more so than anyone else. Like,
Yeah, and from like an employer perspective, this is where rostering really becomes really important, because particularly during busy times like school holidays, because even where younger workers are happy to work longer hours, employers still have that, legal responsibility to make sure that the requirements are being followed.
Yeah, and also I'd like to mention as well, I suppose, with your younger employees that are 16 or under, there is different compliance documentation with regards at the start of the employment. You must issue them with specific documentation that includes signatures of a parent or guardian when they go into the employment. I suppose that's something that can be got wrong as well. It was legislation brought in the mid-90s. I, I suppose with the view that how can a 15 or 16-year-old sign an employment contract with an employer. So if you got workers 16 or under, it's a separate piece of compliance documentation. And the parent or guardian needs to be involved in that, and you need signatures from them. So that's worth mentioning as well.
Absolutely. And just on that as well, like employers can really overlook that, or they mightn't be aware of that. So it's important to remember that. And the key thing with younger workers is the legislation, like it's really focused on protecting them, younger workers, and their well-being and their rest time and education, which is
which is fair
should be
enough.
noted. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fair. It's fair legislation, to be fair. Minimum wage, Colin, will you run through that to us? There's different rates. People might be aware of them. Some maybe not. I suppose like younger workers are very important during the seasonal highs, and an awful lot of employers don't stick to the 78, 80 and 90% rates depending on the age, and within good reason. But run through them for us.
Yes, Damien, and I'm sure viewers of the show will be aware that the national minimum wage rose to €14.15 from January of this year. But what people may not be aware of, that there is an option in the National Minimum Wage Act to reduce the rate for inexperienced workers fairly considerably. For example, the rate for under 18-year-old workers is set at 70% of the full rate. So you're talking about around a €4 reduction there in the hourly rate. That's rising to 80% for 18-year-olds and 90% for 19-year-olds. But no, there have often been calls to scrap the reduced rates. And yeah, in a tight labour market, it would be interesting to understand what percentage of businesses are actually implementing the inexperienced rates for younger workers. But the option is there in any case.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of younger workers, they go in, they start maybe at 16, 17, and they become kind of vital during the high season for that employer, and the kind of rules around what age they are kind of get scrapped because they become very valuable for the employer. So there's an awful lot of employers, I suppose, not sticking to that as well, but it's good to be aware of it. I suppose these things are always rushed. The season employments, you can get your younger workers, they're finished their exams and they go out looking for the job, and they may start within a number of days and it can be rushed. But I think it's important to make the point that it's having your ducks in a row. So you have that compliance documentation, the information available to your line managers and so on as well. We run line manager training. I think it's, there's a stat that 82% of line managers haven't received any formal training, and then they're managing people. So I suppose this is the type of information that in line manager training, HR Buddy can help you with as well, and maybe it's worthwhile considering that. But we're going to move on to looking at the terms of employment side of things, Breach, and I suppose with regards to seasonal hiring, just explain or advise on that.
Regarding seasonal workers, I suppose just because somebody is a seasonal worker doesn't mean employment law doesn't apply to them. So they still have the same employment rights and protection as other employees. So if you're hiring someone on a fixed term basis, make sure they receive proper contracts and written terms from the outset. Remember that like the general principle is that fixed term and seasonal employees should be treated no less favorably than comparable, permanent employees. But an issue that comes up a lot with employers is contracts for younger workers, particularly students. So clients would often ask when I go into their business or meet them for the first time, they might they might say, what type of contracts should we actually put them on? So because every situation is different and it can look different, some students may only work, over the summer, or others might work during midterm break or Christmas, and some may just work weekends or work at college. So for example, I suppose what I'm trying to say is there really isn't a one size fits all approach, which is why it's always best to get advice on a specific arrangement.
Yeah, and I suppose it's something that we see a lot across our payroll service as well, and we often try and clean that up for clients as well who could come in with us. You know, they don't know whether someone is coming back to them next summer or when they're working again. I think there's still mistakes being made as well with 0-hour contracts and so on, the accrual of holidays and all that type of thing. And I suppose let's be very clear, 0-hour contracts are illegal. Casual contracts aren't, but casual contracts mean, the worker can refuse work. So, I think you're dead right, Breach, in saying that every situation is different, every workplace is different, and maybe, every contract with each younger worker is different, and that it, needs its own consideration, I suppose, and we come across different examples
Absolutely.
of that.
But generally speaking, just to add on to that, Damien, if you are hiring someone just for the summer period, I'd usually recommend using a fixed term summer contract initially. And then if they continue working, so for example, if someone's coming in and they want a summer job from now for the summer, you could give them a fixed term contract for the summer. But then if they continue working casually, from September onwards, you can move them on to that more casual, as required arrangement.
Yes, yeah. I think that's good advice.
But also on that as well, you'd want to avoid unintentionally creating a permanent full-time arrangement over a number of years, where say the original intention might just have been for the seasonal or casual worker to come in for the summer period, and then they could be finished college or 4 years later or so on, and they could have a good few years service built up. So an employment rights then, as you know, can become more complex. So it's definitely an area that it's good to get set up right from the start, from the beginning.
Yeah, and 12-month service gives you, full employment rights and so on.
Absolutely, so just to be mindful of that.
Yeah, okay. We'll leave the younger workers there, and we're going to move on to a WRC case. And I suppose we always look at a WRC case, and we look to break it down and get a learning from it. So, Colin, we're looking at a case here that involved on Tagisk. And I suppose we're zoning in on a learning here with regards to your fixed term contracts and continually running fixed term contracts. So run through the case here.
Damien, this decision was published recently, and it is instructive for a number of reasons when we're talking about seasonal or fixed term hiring, and it builds on the point Breach was making there around successive contracts and so on. So in this particular case, the employee was hired by, as you said, Teagasc, who are a semi-state authority in the agri-food sector. She was employed on a specified purpose or fixed term contract. This was back in 2016, which on the face of it, it's fine, as we know that employment in many circumstances can be based on the completion of a specific project or a specific purpose, or it could be dependent on, as we know, the continuation of external funding. And so the position of the employer here was that the project that the employee had been working on was unchanged, uninterrupted, and so a permanent contract or an update to the existing contract was not required. Although, interestingly, reference was made in the hearing to separate phases of this overall project, and the adjudicator did refer to these phases in terms of stating that the employer could have updated the terms of employment at the completion of these phases, but also the adjudicator did state that this may have put the employer outside the rules we discussed there on the issuance of successive contracts in terms of the protection of fixed term workers legislation that's important here. In any case, the decision was that in the absence of an updated contract, several other factors could also be considered as contract renewal points including, for example, there was a regrading of the employee's role during the 10 years on the employment contract. There was a change to her duties at one point. And it was stated as well that it was excessive to rely on the initial fixed term contract when there was no end date inside for the overall project. So, look, in summary, the upshot is that an employer cannot rely solely on what was called the contractual labels, basically, when the practical reality of what is happening on the ground is not in line with the paperwork. So the decision was in favour of the employee based on the protection of fixed term workers, and the award was 15,000, and along with an instruction to issue the permanent contract.
Yeah, and I suppose the learning is that okay, like I mean, we prepare an awful lot of employment documentation, employment contracts, and so on for I suppose organisations that are receiving funding. And there's no guarantees on the funding into the future. But I suppose the point is you can't just continually run someone on fixed term contracts and not give them their permanent position. There's a whole host of reasons why an employee might want the permanent positions. It's very important when people are going for mortgages and so on. But they get their full employment rights, and I suppose there's a cut-off point. And in this case, like it was a cough up of moolah of €15,000. The employee wins their case and gets their permanent contract. So it was an interesting case, and I suppose there's learnings for a lot of people in that case. Again, if you want advice on employment contracts and you have fixed term workers and so on, we're available at HR Buddy. I'm going to take a look at a different case, Colin, because it kind of ties in with a lot of what we're touching in on this morning, which is employment contracts. They always come up, and I think there's a worry now that maybe there's bad employment contracts going around. Maybe they're being created by AI and self-done and so on. To be very clear, AI won't do an employment contract for you. It'll get about 70 or 80% of it right. But you might as well write it out on a beer mat, if I'm being honest, because if you're missing 10 or 20% of compliance employment legislation inside in employment contracts, you can pay for it. In the case that I'm going to tell you about, it was an educational coordinator who took the case against her employer. Now, what's an educational coordinator? Well, they were working as an English teacher, but they were called an educational coordinator on their contract. They took a case that alleged breaches of the Terms of Employment Information Act. The employee won their case basically because of a badly prepared, I suppose what I would call an unprofessional contract that most likely was prepared by someone who hadn't the eyes to see that it was going to reach 100% compliance. And there was 3 areas of the employment contract that under law should have been there, and they weren't. One was the address of the employer, so very basic. The address of the employer was missing. Also, there was no reference to the Minimum Wage Act 2000 that allows the employee to request a written statement of their pay. Okay, but it was missing, and again, it's very basic, but it was missing. So the employer lost the case. And the third one was the pension wasn't referred to inside. So it was the pension, the National Minimum Wage Act, and the address of the employer were missing from the contract. That employee won their case, and they got awarded $2.5 grand. So it's kind of an expensive oversight. And I suppose the point or the learning is make sure you have a professional prepare your employment contracts. We do that work all the time, and it's important because they're expensive mistakes.
And it just goes to show, Damien, why you just should have that trained professional that actually does the contract, like those items that you mentioned in those cases, in the day-to-day employment relationship. It doesn't really make a whole lot of difference, but in terms of compliance and employment legislation compliance, it obviously does make a difference. So it's always good to get the trained eye over your contracts and documentation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the educational coordinator was turning up to the address of the employer every day in their job as an English teacher, but they won $2,500 because the address wasn't on the employment contract.
Yeah.
So I suppose you're right. It's not important information in the employment relationship, but if it's missing from the employment contract, which is the legal document, it can end up cost you a lot of money. Okay, we always look at WRC cases again across our socials as well on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. If and this podcast and webcast will be available on Spotify and YouTube. But if you have questions and queries or something that you'd like us to cover, let us know. Okay. And if you want any help or support in any area, our email is info@hrbuddy.ie and our website is hrbuddy.ie. A reminder on our poll, by the way, again, it's anonymous and we're asking the question, if you're on live with us today, answer this question. Does your workplace have an extreme weather policy? And again, any queries or questions that are popping into your mind, put them in the Q&A section if you're on live with us this morning. Okay, speaking of polls, I want to move on to the poll that we ran on LinkedIn throughout the month of May, because I think it's interesting reading. We asked the question, excuse me, which of these HR issues do you find most challenging or have the most questions about? Okay, we gave 4 options. We gave absence management, adapting to hybrid cultures, annual leave and public holidays, or recruitment and retention. Now, I would have thought, and you know, I suppose there's a feeling out there that recruitment and retention in, you know, a very tight stretch labour market is kind of the number one thing. The poll tells us it's not. It finished on 8%. Then you had annual leave and public holidays and adapting to hybrid cultures, finishing at 15%. Personally, I thought maybe adapting to hybrid cultures might get a higher percentage, and that was a bit surprising. But I'm by no means surprised at the whopping winner, which is absence management, which finished on 62%, because I'm sure Breach, Patrick and Colin, you agree with me that absence management comes up all of the time. So we're going to zone in on absence management, Colin. When it comes to best practice management frameworks for absence management, what's your advice?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting response, isn't it? And I guess it does show that all organizations are going to need to deal with and address absence at some stage. So in terms of the framework, look, I guess we have to consider that absence happens. People are going to need to take time off at some stage, and so in that context, I think what we need in terms of the framework is a clear and a consistent approach to employee absence and practical procedures in place to allow people to take their time off when it's needed. And again, I guess the key document here is the staff handbook.
Yeah.
In terms of the importance of having an up-to-date and a comprehensive absence policy, and that will clearly call out an individual's obligations in terms of, for example, should we say around notification of absence? Should we say around what are the rules around certification of absence and the parameters around return to work also? So yeah, clear, consistent, and common sense approach, I think, to the absence policy and making sure that's reviewed and up to date and so on. I want one point on that as well, that I guess we do see that does pop up from time to time when we're dealing with new clients, is that if we look at an organization's handbooks and contracts, some of them, some handbooks and indeed even contracts that I've reviewed, they did follow the original details of the Sick Leave Act in terms of phased increases in statutory sick pay from, it was 3 days in 23 up to 5 days and so on, up to actual 10 days paid in 2026.
Yeah,
And,
it was meant to be ramped up to 7
3,
days,
5, 7,
in
and then
25
10. Yeah,
and 10 and 26, which didn't
exactly.
happen. So it got paused
Yeah,
at 5.
yeah, this was paused, yeah, but it's important, I guess, that you can see how that might create confusion, I guess, in the employment relationship and in absence. So it's important that the HR documentation is reviewed and is updated to reflect the current state of play for SSP.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, we've all come across in our work with HR Buddy, I suppose, new clients coming in, we review their policies, their employment documentation, their contracts and handbooks, and you find that they're saying on a legal document that in 2026 there's 10 days statutory sick pay, which from a legal point of view, I suppose, it jumped the gun. It didn't foresee that there was going to be a pausing of the statutory sick pay at 5 days. But on your legal document, your agreement with your employee, you're saying, Colin, is that they're entitled to 10 days in 2026. So it's
Yes,
something, yeah, it's something maybe to check.
yeah, clarity is key here, really, is in terms of what are my obligations. So we accept that people are going to need to take time out. That's life, and just what are the obligations in terms of notification to the business, certification if and when it's required, and then the whole parameters around coming back into the workplace and ensuring business continuity and so on. So they're clarity, as we said, is key.
I think
And
it's an area as well, absence management. I mean, it can be tricky.
mhm,
I suppose line managers and the people managers that we work with um, always find it difficult to deal with because
sure,
you have
yeah,
genuine cases where that empathy does need to be shown. I suppose reasonable accommodations is a big term when it comes to absence management and
yeah,
having that positive approach, positive conversations, and involving expertise as well. I
yeah,
think we as HR consultants are always asked for our opinion on how we can manage any particular absenteeism situation, and particularly maybe when it goes to long term. But it's important to make the point that the professional that gives you the expertise on how an employee can be reasonably accommodated, if, when, and how is Oc Health or your company doctor. And I think
yeah.
there's an awful lot of companies who still aren't using that expertise of a company doctor or Oc Health or
Yeah,
AMO.
I think
I
your
suppose,
point on manager training as well made as well, Damien, in terms of giving equipping managers with the tools to deal with these scenarios, and maybe there can be quite individual situations that come up, and I guess it's just always important to take a practical and a people first approach to dealing with absence, and leading with an empathetic approach, and considering as you said, the whole area of reasonable
yeah.
accommodation,
Yeah,
adjustments, and so on.
I suppose like training gives confidence to the manager, and because I think we do meet and talk to managers all the time, and they're scared of dealing with the absenteeism situation, but there is a way to deal with it, and we advise people on it. But you're right, training is a good idea. Breach, I want to ask you about, I suppose, we come across it, we talk about it all the time. We're dealing with cases of it in our work every day for our clients. But long term, like it becomes a long term absenteeism. And, I suppose that's a whole other area. I suppose, when do you call it? How do you deal with long term absenteeism? What would be your advice in that area?
Well, long-term absence, it's one area that I get a huge amount of queries on from employers.
Yeah.
The question clients often ask is they do ask, like, at what point can I let the employee go? And the reality is there's rarely a straightforward answer because every case is different. But what I would always say first is there are a number of questions, like have you actually followed a proper process? Have you checked in with the employee regularly and kept records of communications? Have you invited them to welfare review meetings? Have you checked in with them? Up-to-date medical information, as you mentioned earlier, is really important. Like, have you referred them to occupational health where appropriate? So it's important that you haven't overlooked any of those. And also, as you mentioned also a while ago, is the reasonable accommodations or supports that could assist that employee in returning to work. So first of all, if I did get asked that question, they're all the questions I would ask back. So it's important that employers check that they have those responses and that they have checked the employee's contract as well.
Yeah.
And their sick leave and absence policies before, making any decisions to go forward.
I mean, I think, I'm often asked the question, like, is there a point, is there a point of no return with regards to long-term absenteeism? It's very, I suppose, like, it's a grey area, but the 12-month
Yeah.
mark is, I'd make the point, is a moment in time that is very, very important because anyone who is absent, okay, from a job, it's a job that exists. So if they're out long term, someone else needs to do that job. If someone else is doing that job and they're a new hire, after 12 months, they get full employment rights. So now you have two people for one job, and that's very difficult for employers to manage. So I suppose there does come a time where you need to sit down with the employee, you need to involve OC Health, the company doctor, you need to ascertain, what is the professional opinion from medical experts on how, where can we get this employee back to work. And that's very fair. There is business concerns for every employer as well, and it's worth making that point that it can be dealt with. And it can come to the point of, I suppose, where someone isn't capable of carrying out their duties.
Absolutely. And ultimately, there can come a point where despite supports and medical reviews, the employee is no longer able to carry out the role that they were employed to do. And there's no reasonable time frame for returns. So I suppose that's when the difficult decisions need to be considered. But the key thing that employers need to show is that, the process was fair, reasonable, and medically informed, before reaching that stage, that decision.
I suppose just to mention metrics as well. With regards to absenteeism, I suppose we've gone into, maybe deep into long-term absenteeism there and so on. But I suppose the more regular problems for an awful lot of employers and HR departments is, maybe your sickies, the non-genuine ones, having the policy in place so you can deal with that, having your managers trained so they can deal with this confidently. But like I'm talking about kind of, the Monday sickies and that maybe aren't genuine and so on. And I always think metrics is very, very important. And again, having a software at your disposal that can deal with, time attendance tracking, can pull up information that, your data analysis and reviews that ensure that you're being compliant on the Organisation of Working Time Act. It's just a good idea at this day and age, rather than kind of managers forming opinions on, because it's always interesting when you look at those data analysis reviews that you can get from a software like HR Buddy Manager, is to see trends inside workplaces. And there's always a trend, and I think there's always a trend that you can act upon. Okay, guys. Again, if you have any questions, pop them in the Q&A if you're on with us live today. We'll get to it at the end of the show in our live Q&A section. And again, if you haven't completed the poll, does your workplace have an extreme weather policy? We'll have the results of that very soon. But now I'm going to move on to our HR and employment law update. We always do this as well. There's always something happening. So we want to try and run through what's happening out there and keep everybody up to date. Breach contracts. Is everybody compliant? An interesting area has come up for you with regards to Social Security and PRSI contract clauses. So we're kind of tying back into what we're talking about earlier on now, and something being missing from the employment contract that needs to be there. That can be an oversight, I suppose.
Absolutely. Yes, it's an area employers should be mindful of, and one that may not be widely known is a requirement to include a Social Security or PRSI clause in employment contracts. So the requirement comes from the European Union. It's transparent and predictable working conditions regulations in 22. So we can seem like a minor detail, but it's something that the WRC may check and have been checking in their inspections. And it can be overlooked when contracts maybe, I'd say, haven't been updated in the last number of years. So it's important. And it kind of touches on that case that you mentioned earlier, that it's just something small, but it's missing, and the inspector will notice it. So employment legislation really requires employers to outline certain key information around pay and statutory deductions, and contracts should always reference social insurance contributions in line with the obligations.
Okay. Permit holders, Patrick, we have some important information or updates, I suppose, with regards to permit holders.
Yeah, and again, this is based on our own practical experience in dealing with clients. So basically, when an employee is working on a permit, there is a minimum salary threshold that the employee needs to have in order to obtain that passport. and that would be included in the contract of employment when applying for the permit itself. However, what we do see is that employers innocently approve unpaid leave for workers on permits, and the effect of that unpaid leave, it could even be for a couple of weeks or even less, depending on the salary that they're on. What we find is that the employee within that particular 12-month period, then actually their actual earnings fall below the minimum salary threshold that is required on the permit. So, for example, general employment permits, the minimum salary threshold is 36,605 euros. Or in the case of critical skills permits, the minimum salary threshold is 40,904 euros. So, for example, if somebody on the critical skills who's on a salary 41,000 and they're approved unpaid leave for even a week, that might actually bring them below the salary threshold. So what you'll find in is that the employer is not actually compliant with the terms of the permit itself. Like it's not exactly a matter of getting a permit and doing what you like there afterwards.
Yeah.
Like you still need to comply with the terms of the permit, and that would include the place of work as well. The working hours, like you can't just change those. Even the role that the individual was hired for on their permit, it doesn't exactly mean you can just second the employee to work anywhere else in the organization once you've got that permit approval. So permit compliance, it's an ongoing matter.
Yeah, I suppose there can be, it's an important point to make. There can be maybe the attitude, and you need to be careful about that. That when you get your permit approval, that's it. And it isn't really. You have to uphold compliance. And the point about falling under the threshold, you need to keep the threshold. You need that compliance. And if someone takes a month off and then they fall unpaid and they fall under it, you're not meeting permit compliance. Okay, so what can employers do with regards to permit holders, Patrick?
So the first thing that I would advise clients always is know what type of permits your employees are on. So then at least you'll know the minimum salary threshold that they're meant to be on within that given 12-month period. Afterwards, then, if you do get a request for an unpaid leave, assess what impact the approval of that leave will have on the employee's salary for the year. As part of that, you must keep clear payroll records so you know what your employee has earned in the past and whether they're likely to meet that minimum salary threshold or not. And as we've both mentioned earlier, permit compliance, it's an ongoing obligation. So, and that's just something that I've found working with clients. That's something that they have slipped up on the past. Is that unpaid leave? It's something that they approve. It really, as a gesture of goodwill, maybe they need to travel back home for a certain period and don't have the annual leave. But again, as I said, it's ongoing compliance with the terms of the permit. It's absolutely paramount. Otherwise, the employer is in breach of the permit terms.
Yes, yeah, no, it's a very good point. A big area of update is the Employment Permits Amendment Regulations 2026. So we're looking at here, Patrick, there's new roles going to be added to the list of critical skills. Roles are moved from ineligible list of occupations, new quotas for certain occupations, and an interesting proposal there as well about the 50-50 rule. Give us a bit of info on these things.
So yeah, the new roles on the critical skills list. So these would include intellectual property professionals, it's construction schedulers. So these are roles that employers are struggling to hire within Ireland because the skills and qualified individuals are not there. So the government allow for the employment of individuals from outside the EEA on these types of permits.
Yeah.
There are also a number of roles removed from the ineligible list of occupations. So what that means now that certain roles such as pharma techs, steel fixers, dental hygienists, they can now apply for a general employment permit, whereas prior to this, they could not, they would not be eligible for a permit. There are new quotas for certain occupations as well. So the quotas have been revised for roles including butchers, seafood operatives, HG mechanics. So the amount of permits that are permitted for each of those roles has now increased. And also there's a proposal to remove the 50-50 rule in the health and social care sector for certain roles. So again, these are just proposals, but I anticipate that they will be implemented sooner rather than later. And basically, employers within the health and social care sector are struggling to hire. And as part of a general permit application, they will have to complete a labour market needs test. And that needs to basically, this is where the role will be advertised for 30 days, which presents a significant delay in the recruitment process itself. So the government are looking at waiving that labour markets needs test now, basically freeing up those 30 days, allowing for faster recruitment of those skilled individuals within that sector.
Yeah, and we know from our experience, as you say, working with our clients with regards to permit applications and so on. I mean, I would have to say that proposal to remove the 50-50 rule in the health and social care sector is one that just makes sense, and one I hope does go through. Okay, we're going to move it along to gender pay gap reporting, because it's a big month for gender pay gap reporting. It's the month where if you have 50 employees or more than 50 employees, you need to get your snapshot. So, Breach, back to you. There's some important info to give out here.
Yes, gender pay gap reporting is really important topic at the moment, particularly because we're now in June, which is a key reporting month for employers. So employers are currently selecting their snapshot date and preparing for the reporting process. So it's definitely something that should already be on the employer's radar. So once an employer has 50 or more employees, the gender pay gap reporting is mandatory. And that from that point onwards, it becomes an annual obligation. So employers select a snapshot during June each year, and then the report must be published within 5 months of that date. So, for example, if the employer, you choose the 30th of June as your snapshot date, the deadline to publish the report will be the 30th of November. So the report, as you may be aware, must be published on the employer's website or a publicly accessible area, and it has to remain available for 3 years. So there's also now like a gender pay gap reporting portal available, which is adding further visibility and transparency around like reporting. But I suppose what I'd just like to finish with here is what's really important for employers to understand is that it's not just about producing the figures anymore. Yeah. Employers must also explain the reasons why like a gender pay gap exists within their organization and the measures that they're being taking or proposed to do to like reduce or eliminate that gap. So I suppose for employers, it's important to remember that June is now like a key HR and governance deadline, which employers like it requires your preparation, your data analysis and planning really.
Yeah, I think
mindful.
Some companies are prepared for this, and I suppose the ones with the larger numbers have had to report 250 plus and 150 plus in previous years anyway.
Yes.
And they're big companies, but like bringing in the 50 plus, it was a big change. It involves an awful lot of more workplaces and companies, and I do worry about I suppose the compliance, or whether people fully appreciate and understand the severity of the report. As you said, Breach, like you can't just produce the report, you have to explain how you're addressing the gap, and that needs to be well prepared as well.
Yes, absolutely, and it is mandatory.
Yes,
I've had some employers say, "Oh, well, maybe we don't have to put it up. We don't want to put it up because we don't want people seeing what the information is." But there's no hiding from it. You have to, and if you don't, it's against the law, because gender pay gap reporting has been in for some time now.
Yeah, and obviously there's a fine included in it and so on as well. But I do think there's maybe a misunderstanding, about getting the data that you need to produce your report, and it is a report. We've definitely come across, examples of companies thinking that you can just spit out your gender pay gap report from your payroll software, which actually isn't the case. And I suppose I'll move to you, Colin, because you're going to do the science bit. You're our Jennifer Aniston who does the science bit at the end. So yeah, so like there are up to 20 points that need to be produced. Run through those and explain them to us, and maybe the work involved and advising how can employers get this right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the key point we heard today is that you're not just publishing in a number or a percentage. You are required to report on up to, I think it's 20 separate data points, including the mean and the median hourly pay gaps. And that's across 8 different pay quartiles across male and female employees, basically. There's other factors that have to be accounted for as well, including bonus pay, benefit in kind considerations. That all has to be broken down, analysed, and reported on. Now, in terms of mean and median and so on, maybe viewers have someone at home doing exams at the moment that can refresh them on it, but I'm not entirely sure on what the difference between the mean and the median is myself personally. So, yeah, it's quite a detailed report. Is the message? It's not just an overall number, and so beyond that, the full report needs to be published on the company website and on the government reporting portal as well, which will be mandatory from this year's reporting onwards. So yeah, I'd agree as well. I guess that we've seen this thing really pick up pace since the threshold dropped from, I know as you said it was previously 250, and it continually came down to 50 plus now, which it takes in a huge amount of workplaces in Ireland. So
Yeah,
so
I
yeah,
don't
it's
like.
important
I
people are
think
briefed.
the point I would make here is that what's important now for in the month of June is you need to get your snapshot, but then
Absolutely.
you very quickly now need to realize and know how you're going to get the information, prepare it, and get your report. So you have that, let's say by the end of November. Okay. There are two ways of doing it. You spit out some information off your payroll software and you get someone to work on those up to 20 points on an Excel sheet. That's the old-fashioned way. Or, in my opinion, you do it the easy way, which probably costs less money, definitely costs less time, and you have a software like HR Buddy Manager that can give you your gender pay gap report and actually prepare the report for you. And then all you've left to do is maybe address within your team with the appropriate people how you're going to address any gender pay gaps. And you put your report up on the portal, which is going to become mandatory, and you publish it on your website for 3 years. I think there is a misunderstanding that HR professionals are just going to come along and work on Excel sheets in some companies on something that it's not their expertise. Like my opinion is go to software that can do this for you. It's cheaper, it's easier, it's less man hours. But we have come across that misconception that, all of a sudden HR professionals are going to turn into qualified accountants, and go into, there's a lot of information inside in those 20 points. You also don't want to publicly, put out incorrect information or put out information in error as well. That's not a good idea. So look, gender pay gap reporting is important. If you need guidance or advice or help, or if you want to look at how HR Buddy Manager software can help you do it very, very easily, get in touch. Okay, again, we're going to move on to the EU pay transparency. Very important. It's our last topic of the morning, but breach is very important. The deadline was June 7th, which we know Ireland is now not meeting. But what do employers need to do at this stage?
Well, Damien, this is one topic that has caused a lot of discussion this week, the EU Pay Transparency Directive, because the long-awaited transposition deadline was actually Sunday, the 7th of June, which in itself is kind of an odd day for it to be scheduled as the date. but the EU member states were required to transpose it into law by that date, and the many employers already, we've all known that Ireland would not meet that deadline, but everybody was waiting to see what the official position would be and what the new timeline might be. But it has now been formally confirmed that Ireland will not meet the deadline. And in a written response recently to parliamentary question on the 26th of May, Minister Foley confirmed that while work has been progressing, a range of factors has delayed the directive. So the European Commission has been notified that Ireland will not meet the directive fully transposed by the June deadline. It is believed that 3 member states is all that have actually met this deadline. So the delay has been linked to a number of factors. One issue that has been highlighted is the employer guidance, like the toolkits from the EU level. So they were published at I think it was the end of March, the 26th of March, and these now need to be adapted to Ireland. So they're saying that caused a delay with Ireland kind of being on track and so on. But I suppose the key message for employers is that while legislation has been delayed, it is very much coming down the line, and implementation will happen on a phased basis rather than everything coming overnight. So employers should really use this period to continue preparing, reviewing the recruitment practices and your pay structures and your policies. And getting into the habit of maybe, including the salary bandings and job adverts, reviewing your pay structures and moving away from asking candidates about their previous salary levels during recruitment. But
I would say, Breach, and we should be fair, it's not going to be easy, to get salaries into bands, and it may cause issues inside workforces as well.
Oh, absolutely, it will, and it's only when it happens it'll all unfold and as developments go on. But like say in the media now this week, it was reported that IBEC asked Minister Foley to confirm that the new transparency rules would not take effect until say June 27. But it's important employers don't take that as a that's not set in stone, or that's only a request that they put in, and it's not a reason to delay preparations, because the exact implementation date isn't set in stone, but the changes will be coming, as I've said.
Yeah, and I suppose it's important to say it's an EU directive, so it's happening. Whether it's how long it's delayed for is one thing, but one thing is for sure that any EU directive such as this, it's going to be transposed into Irish employment law.
Yeah, and from best practice perspective, just get into the practice now of the habit of doing things right and trying to get used to the changes. And be better off in the long run.
And it wasn't that long ago that we're all getting excited about the introduction of pension auto enrollment, and that in itself it involved a lot of work. But dare I say, NERSA also did a lot of work in terms of the pension auto enrollment, in terms of picking up the employees that were to be auto enrolled.
Yeah.
With the pay transparency directive, really the obligation is solely on the employer. There is no external government party that's going to assist you with this. So that's where really, with the proactiveness, that's where I'd always be encouraging clients to reach out to ourselves with assistance in basically getting your ducks in a row with this directive, because this is going to I really think that this is going to make pension auto enrollment seem like a, dare I say, walk in the park.
Yeah, and we all had nightmares over pension auto enrollment, so but we don't want to scare anyone. But no, look, get prepared again. info@hrbuddy.ie. Our website is hrbuddy.ie. If you need some support, get in contact with us. Okay, guys, thank you. Colin, can we get the poll results?
Sure.
So we asked the question in the poll, does your workplace have an extreme weather policy? Okay, so you just try and get that up now. So what have we got? Here are the results. I have them. Okay, does your company have an extreme weather policy? So 33% say yes. 59% say no.
Surprising.
Yeah, and it is very high. It's very high. And I don't know 7%. I always think if you don't know, what good is it? So I'm going to add the 7% to the 59% and say basically or 66%, 66, 67% are pretty much saying no one way or the other. there's only 1/3, 33% aware that they have an extreme weather policy. Okay, don't beat yourself up about it, but have an extreme weather policy. So I think that's higher than what we would have expected.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like if you don't have an extreme weather policy, again, you can come to us for advice at HR Buddy, but you can tailor it to your organization. Look after those three parties that I mentioned before. You have to consider all three parties. It's very much health and safety focus, and that's paramount. But it's about the reorganization of work and keeping people safe, and that's going to look different in every workplace and every industry. But if you don't have an extreme weather policy, what happens is everyone's confused, and it causes grievances, it causes disgruntlement, and so on. So, look, if you need help with an extreme weather policy, come to us. Every workplace should have one. Okay. Q&A. We got some great questions in here. I was trying to look at them as we were talking, which is hard because I can't multitask. But we're going to pick them out here, guys, and Patrick, Breach, and Colin. If there's anything you want to come in with, please do. So the first question is, students who complete work experience through their school program, is this a risk to the business? No, it's not. It's very different. So work experience is different to an employment because it's coming through the academic, either college or school. Okay, so there is a difference there. Where someone comes in as a young worker during the summer or whatever, they're in employment. So there's a difference there. So I would look to ease your concerns about bringing in students on work experience. You'd have responsibilities with regards to health and safety to them, and they need to be covered by insurance and all that type of thing. But with regards to employment, you don't need to worry about, I suppose, the information that we were going through today. Okay. Next question. If you issue paperwork and fixed term contract for a 1 to 2 week trial, is that okay to do? The person would receive a proper pay slip, etc. Trials are legal. That's the big point I would make here. I suppose you're giving them a fixed term contract. So leave the word trial out of it. Look, if you're doing this, get professional eyes over the contract, because you don't want those kind of silly oversights inside in what is legal paperwork and the legal agreement. But anything that goes before the WRC and gets called a trial, you're in the wrong place. You're on the illegal side. It's more the terming, I think, that you need to deal with. You can give someone a fixed term contract for a few weeks if that's what you want to do, but do not term it as a trial. Is there a minimum amount of days for the probation period? No, there's not. I suppose under the new Miscellaneous Provisions Act for predictable working conditions, the probation period must be what's termed as reasonable. So there's no kind of numbers put on this. So say, for example, if you took someone on a 6-month contract, and you give them the 6-month probationary period, they get, their full term can't be probationary. So 6 months might be a 2 or 3 month probationary period. That would be seen as reasonable. Unfortunately, there isn't any numbers in legislation on it that give you kind of a cap on certain periods or anything like that, but it must be viewed as reasonable. Is there minimum amount of days? Sorry, I've done that one. Next question. I'll try and get through them all. How do parents need to be involved? Do they need to be there during induction period, or is a permission of employment from the parents accepted? It's a signature. Parents don't need to be with workers in the workplace. And I'm going to invite that on employers anyway. But no, it's just a signature. The point is that someone under 16 doesn't, under the Young Persons at Work Act, doesn't sign the employment contract terms and conditions. Their parent or guardian does, and you can appreciate that. So look, it's a signature, but if you ever get that Young Persons contract for a 15 or 16-year-old young fella or young girl that's going into the workplace, you need to read the terms and conditions, and you're signing for it, and you're giving your permission, and it's only for 16 and under, and definitely you do not need to turn up at work with them. I presume they won't let you anyway. So for fixed term, what if it is a seasonal event once a year for 4 weeks, and they've been working with us for that short period every year. However, the event is not guaranteed every year. So I'd say you would be doing, again, look, every situation is different, as Breach said, that you just do a specific fixed term contract for that 4-week period when you can guarantee the work each year. Okay, so like the contract of employment is honest and you're not taking any risks. Do you need to include the Minimum Wage Act and pension, even if the company doesn't offer pension? Only the pension supplied by the government. Can you also clarify the Minimum Wage Act on this? Did they not include the rate of pay, or should there be a section detail the 70% of national minimum wage can be paid? Okay, so yes, the Minimum Wage Act needs to be included. I suppose that was our point. You can't leave it out. Same with pension. Like regardless of how you provide your pension, whether it's private or through auto enrollment, doesn't matter. You can't leave pensions out of an employment contract. You can't leave National Minimum Wage Act 2000 out of employment contracts, as per the case that we went through on the show today. Where 2,500 was awarded to the employee because that information was missing. And you detail your wages, you detail the National Minimum Wage Act. Again, if you need professionalised go across your contracts, that might be a good idea. What's hybrid culture? It's trying to manage people who are working both on site, maybe in the workplace, and people working remotely at the same time, and trying to manage the communication and how people work together and the fairness of it. And an awful lot of workplaces find that difficult. They're providing the flexibility, but maybe it can impact on relationships and so on. Very complex situation, but only for 15% of employers, as our poll told us, and absenteeism is a much bigger problem, it seems. How is the best way to manage remote workers in relation to absence, as it is hard to know if they are away from the desk, if they haven't notified their manager, and how should this be approached, avoiding accusation? Okay, look, that's a pretty open-ended question. And Patrick or Breach or Colin, if you want to come in and give advice on this, you can. But
yeah, I suppose look, and look, absence is something that does come up all the time, I guess, really, doesn't it? Look, it happens. It's important, as we said earlier, to have a clear and comprehensive policy in there, and practical as well, I guess. And look, you want to be sensitive to people's situations, in terms of there's an element there of I guess, fear of being seen as accusatory or so on. But look, once people are clear on their obligations when they're going to be out, in terms of notification to the business, that they're not working today, or they're going to be sick, or whatever the case is. Once that's clearly flagged, and then the parameters around certification, around returning to work, look, you need a fully spec'd out comprehensive policy that will deal with situations around. I think I see one there around patterns of absence as well, around trigger points and so on. Yeah, which, look, trigger points they make sense in some situations. They're a fairly blunt instrument, I suppose, in terms of the absence patterns. But look, once there's a policy that's devised for the business, and we work with clients to make sure that that's right for the business. That's whether it's absence management, trends of absence, trigger points, they're all up for consideration. And the point around occupational health and medical guidance and so on, and the piece that was discussed around long-term absence. Once that's all in there, so there's quite a bit in the absence piece, I suppose. But so that does need to be spec'd out and communicated to everyone in the organisation.
Another question here, it's a good question. If there is no trigger points in a policy for issuing warnings, what guidance would you have in terms of disciplining employees for repeated absences? Example, 4 occasions missed in 6 months. Well, look, it's very hard to go through that and give out free advice. We just don't have time here. But the one point I would make on this question is, if you don't have trigger points in a policy for issuing warnings, your policy isn't good enough. So you need to go back to your policy and make sure your policy is strong enough.
Next, I suppose the importance of HR software here as well is highlighted, I suppose, in terms of being able to have good quality data around when people are at work, on leave, sick, and so on. If you don't have that, if you don't have the data, if you can't measure it, then you can't manage it, as they say.
Yeah, so have a good policy and have your data so you have it documented. Next question is the gender pay gap based off employees hired annually. We're a small company and have about under 5 employees for 9 months of the year, but during the season period can go up to 100 and 150. So the snapshot is in June, as we said, okay, and you do employ over 50. So the snapshot is in June. So you're going to fall under it. Okay. I think we're trying to get to the end of this very quickly. For gender pay gap reporting with a company of 5 employees, where is this to be held, shared, etc. So the good news for you is you don't need to do it. It's 50 plus employees. So unless that's a typo, you're saying you 5 employees, you're off scot-free. You don't need to do it. It's 50 plus employees, so you don't qualify for it. So relax and have a cup of tea for yourself. You don't need to be worrying about it. How about unpaid maternity leave when the employee is on a permit? Will this affect the MAR when it's renewal time? Okay, so that's I suppose a specific situation with regards to maternity leave. You do need to meet the threshold. So I suppose that can impact, as Patrick was saying, with regards to the permit. But again, if you need more advice on a specific situation, maybe come to us directly. Okay, they're great questions. Thanks for everyone who joined us today live. Thank you very much. If you're someone that's listening on our podcast, we really appreciate it. We'll be back with another webcast next month. Stay tuned to our socials. The podcast is available on YouTube and Spotify. I want to thank Breach Fallon, Patrick Scanlon, Colin Ryan, Liz Cummings as well in the background for all their work in preparing this. We don't just show up and do it. All the information has got together, and the team puts a lot of hard work into it. So thank you very much for joining us. This has been the HR Buddy podcast. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.